are great marksmen. Therefore...
Jean-Claude Van Damme plays Alain Moreau, a tough French police officer whose ordinary life suddenly changes when he discovers that he had an identical twin brother he never knew existed. The story begins in Nice, France, where Alain works as a police detective and tries to keep his life under control. He is disciplined, experienced, and accustomed to dealing with criminals, but nothing prepares him for the shocking discovery that someone who looks exactly like him has been living a completely different life. One day, Alain comes across a mysterious man who appears to be his exact double. Before Alain can understand what is happening, the stranger is killed in front of him. Alain is stunned because the dead man has his face, his body, and even the same physical features. At first, Alain thinks there must be some unbelievable coincidence, but the evidence quickly tells him that this is something much deeper. He begins investigating the man's identity and discovers that the victim was his twin brother, Mikhail Suvorov. Alain had never known that his mother had given birth to twins, and the revelation completely changes his understanding of his own past. The discovery also creates a dangerous mystery because Mikhail was not living an ordinary life. He was connected to organized crime, Russian criminals, and a complicated network of dangerous people. Alain realizes that the man who looked exactly like him had enemies, secrets, and a life filled with violence. What makes the situation even more disturbing is that Mikhail's enemies may not know that he is dead. Alain soon understands that his identical appearance could become both his greatest advantage and his biggest danger. As Alain investigates further, he begins putting together the pieces of his brother's hidden life. Mikhail had been involved with people who operated far outside the law, and his connections were much more serious than Alain initially imagined. Alain learns that Mikhail was married to Alex, a beautiful and intelligent woman who also knows far more about the dangerous world surrounding her husband than Alain does. When Alain first approaches her, she believes that Mikhail has returned. This creates an opportunity for Alain to learn more about his twin, but it also puts him directly inside a world where one wrong move could get him killed. Alain has to hide his true identity while pretending to be Mikhail, because revealing the truth could expose him to the people responsible for his brother's death. The situation becomes even more complicated because Mikhail's criminal associates expect him to behave like the man they knew. Alain is a police officer, not a professional criminal, so he has to carefully imitate his brother while secretly investigating what happened. Every conversation becomes dangerous because the people around Mikhail are experienced at detecting weakness and deception. Alain knows that if anyone realizes he is not Mikhail, they may kill him immediately. At the same time, Alain cannot simply walk away because he wants answers about his brother's murder. He wants to know why Mikhail was killed, who ordered the attack, and what kind of criminal organization his twin was involved with. The deeper he goes, the more Alain realizes that Mikhail's death was not an isolated incident. It is part of a much larger criminal operation that could put innocent people in serious danger. The biggest challenge for Alain is that he must live between two completely different identities. On one side, he is a police officer who believes in justice and follows the law. On the other side, everyone around him thinks he is Mikhail, a man associated with criminals and dangerous activities. Alain begins using his brother's identity to get close to the people who may know the truth. His police training helps him remain calm, observe details, and understand criminal behavior, but his lack of knowledge about Mikhail's personal relationships creates constant problems. He has to learn quickly who Mikhail trusted, who hated him, and who might have wanted him dead. Alex becomes especially important because she can provide information about Mikhail that Alain cannot discover through official police records. However, Alain also realizes that his relationship with Alex is complicated because she is grieving a man she believes is still alive. She begins noticing small differences in his behavior, creating the possibility that his secret could be exposed. Meanwhile, Alain's investigation brings him closer to a dangerous group involved in illegal activities. The criminals are powerful, heavily armed, and willing to eliminate anyone who becomes a threat. Alain understands that he cannot simply arrest them because he is operating undercover and does not yet have enough evidence. Instead, he must continue pretending to be Mikhail while gathering information. This forces him into situations where violence becomes unavoidable. His skills as a fighter and police officer allow him to survive, but every confrontation increases the chance that someone will recognize that something is wrong. As Alain gets deeper into the mystery, he discovers that his brother's life was connected to a much larger criminal conspiracy involving powerful figures and dangerous deals. The people behind the operation are not ordinary street criminals. They have money, influence, weapons, and connections that make them extremely difficult to stop. Alain begins to understand why Mikhail had so many enemies and why his death happened under mysterious circumstances. The more he investigates, the more he realizes that his twin may have known something that could threaten the entire organization. This could explain why Mikhail was targeted. Alain also discovers that some people around Mikhail may have their own hidden agendas, meaning he cannot automatically trust anyone. Even Alex may not know the full truth about her husband's activities. Alain must therefore rely on his instincts and police experience to separate the truth from lies. His greatest advantage remains his face. Because he is identical to Mikhail, he can enter places and speak to people who would never talk to Alain as a police officer. But that same advantage creates enormous danger because the criminals expect Mikhail to know everything they know. Alain must constantly improvise. He studies Mikhail's behavior, watches the reactions of others, and tries to collect information without exposing himself. At the same time, he begins developing a personal connection to the life his brother left behind. Although Alain never knew Mikhail, he starts feeling responsible for discovering the truth about his death and protecting the people connected to him. The investigation eventually becomes personal when Alain realizes that the people responsible for Mikhail's death may still be watching everything around him. His decision to investigate has placed him directly in the line of fire. The criminals begin searching for information, while Alain continues moving through their world under his brother's identity. Every moment becomes a test of his ability to remain convincing. He has to remember names, relationships, locations, and details about Mikhail's past while simultaneously trying to uncover the conspiracy. One mistake could reveal everything. Alain also begins experiencing the emotional consequences of discovering a brother he never knew. The idea that he and Mikhail were separated from birth forces Alain to question his own family history and wonder what his life might have been like if they had grown up together. Instead of having the chance to meet his brother peacefully, he is forced to understand him through clues, memories, and the people Mikhail left behind. This gives the story an emotional layer beneath the action. Alain is not only trying to solve a murder, he is trying to understand a missing part of his own identity. But the criminals do not care about his personal feelings, they only care about protecting their operation. As Alain gets closer to the truth, the danger around him increases, and he realizes that surviving this investigation will require more than courage. He will have to use every skill he has as a detective and fighter to the criminal organizations surrounding Mikhail, and this forces him to behave like someone he never was. As a police officer, Alain is trained to question suspects and investigate crimes, but now he has to act as though he belongs to the criminal world. He must convince dangerous men that he is Mikhail without revealing that he has never lived their life. The situation becomes extremely risky whenever someone asks him about a past event that only Mikhail could remember. Alain survives these moments by staying confident and changing the direction of conversations whenever necessary. His physical abilities also become important because violence is always close to the surface. When criminals become suspicious, Alain has to defend himself without exposing too much about his real identity. His fighting skills allow him to escape several dangerous situations, but each confrontation makes the criminals more alert. Meanwhile, Alain continues learning about Mikhail's relationships and discovers that his brother was connected to people who were involved in a major illegal operation. The organization has enough resources to make people disappear and silence anyone who threatens them. Alain realizes that Mikhail may have learned something that made him dangerous to the organization. This gives Alain a possible motive for the murder, but he still needs evidence. Without proof, he cannot bring the criminals down legally. He therefore decides to continue playing the role of Mikhail while secretly collecting information that can eventually expose the people responsible. Alex becomes increasingly confused by Alain's behavior. She knows the man standing in front of her looks exactly like her husband, but emotionally he feels different. Alain does not have Mikhail's memories, mannerisms, or personal history, and these differences become harder for him to hide. Yet Alex also notices that the man she thought was Mikhail seems more concerned about her safety than before. Alain wants to protect her because she is connected to the person he is trying to understand, but his growing feelings make the situation even more complicated. He cannot forget that he is actually investigating his own twin brother's death, and Alex is still grieving the man she believes she lost. Eventually, Alain reveals enough of the truth for Alex to understand that something extraordinary has happened. Instead of simply being Mikhail, the man in front of her is his identical twin. The revelation changes everything. Alex realizes that her husband had a brother she never knew about, and Alain finally has someone who can help him understand Mikhail's life. She explains details about Mikhail that are impossible to find through police records. Through her memories, Alain begins seeing a different side of his brother. Mikhail was not simply a criminal surrounded by violence, he had his own fears, relationships, and reasons for becoming involved with dangerous people. Alain begins to understand that Mikhail may have been trying to survive inside a world that had already become too powerful for him to escape. The investigation soon leads Alain toward one of the most dangerous figures connected to Mikhail's criminal activities. This man has influence, money, and armed people working for him, making him extremely difficult to confront directly. Alain realizes that the organization is protected by layers of criminals, meaning he cannot simply walk into their headquarters and arrest everyone. He needs to find the people at the top and understand how their operation works. His police instincts tell him to gather evidence, but circumstances keep forcing him into physical confrontations. Several criminals begin testing him, expecting Mikhail to respond in familiar ways. Alain instead relies on his intelligence and combat skills to survive. His opponents quickly discover that he is much more capable in a fight than they expected. The action becomes increasingly intense as Alain moves from one dangerous location to another, trying to stay one step ahead of the people who want him dead. At the same time, he begins realizing that the criminals may eventually discover that Mikhail is dead. If they confirm that the man they are dealing with is actually Alain, his entire plan will collapse. Alain therefore has to work faster. He wants to identify the person responsible for Mikhail's murder before the criminals identify him. The pressure becomes enormous because every new clue gives him information, but also increases the danger surrounding him. Alain eventually discovers that Mikhail had been connected to a much larger operation involving illegal deals and powerful criminals. The organization is not interested in Mikhail personally, it is interested in protecting its business. Anyone who threatens that business becomes a target. Alain realizes that his brother may have become a problem because he knew too much or had attempted to move away from the criminal world. This possibility changes Alain's understanding of the murder. Mikhail may not have simply been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He may have been deliberately eliminated because someone believed he could expose the organization. Alain now has a stronger reason to continue the investigation. He wants justice for his brother, but he also wants to prevent the criminals from hurting more innocent people. His police background pushes him toward taking the entire organization down. However, his greatest obstacle is that he cannot officially investigate everything without revealing how he discovered the connection. He therefore continues operating outside normal police procedures. Every step he takes becomes more dangerous because the criminals are beginning to notice inconsistencies in his behavior. Some of them start asking questions about Mikhail's actions, and Alain has to respond carefully. His ability to remain calm under pressure keeps his cover alive, but he knows it will not last forever. The situation reaches a new level when Alain realizes that the people around Mikhail are beginning to suspect something. His identical appearance gives him access to places that would normally be impossible for a police officer, but the disguise can only work as long as nobody looks too closely. Alain starts taking greater risks because he knows that time is running out. He follows leads, confronts criminals, and searches for evidence that can connect the murder to the larger operation. During this process, he becomes more emotionally attached to the mystery of his brother. Although Mikhail was a stranger to him at the beginning, Alain now feels as if he is trying to complete something his brother could not finish. He begins thinking about what their lives might have been like if they had grown up together. They could have been completely different people, but fate separated them and eventually brought them together under tragic circumstances. Alain refuses to let Mikhail's death become meaningless. At the same time, Alex becomes an important ally, helping him understand the personal side of Mikhail's life. Together, they begin piecing together information that could reveal the truth. But the criminals are closing in. Alain's actions have attracted attention, and the organization is becoming increasingly aggressive. Soon, Alain will have to stop hiding and start confronting the people responsible for destroying his brother's life. Alain Moreau is now fully trapped inside the dangerous world left behind by his twin brother Mikhail. What started as a search for answers has become a personal mission for justice. Alain continues using Mikhail's identity because it allows him to move among the criminals without immediately revealing who he really is. However, every conversation becomes more dangerous because these people knew Mikhail personally. They expect him to remember details about old deals, meetings, and relationships. Alain has to rely on his intelligence and confidence whenever someone asks a difficult question. At the same time, he carefully studies everyone around him to discover who can be trusted. The closer he gets to the truth, the more obvious it becomes that Mikhail's death was planned. Alex is also beginning to understand the seriousness of Alain's situation. After learning that he is Mikhail's identical twin, she realizes why his behavior has been different. Alain tells her that he is trying to discover who killed his brother and why. Alex knows that Mikhail was involved with dangerous people, but she does not know the entire truth about his criminal connections. She begins sharing everything she remembers about her husband and the people who surrounded him. These memories give Alain valuable information about Mikhail's movements and relationships. Alex also realizes that the people responsible for Mikhail's death could come after Alain as well. Their cooperation becomes essential because Alain needs someone who understands Mikhail's personal life. Together, they begin connecting clues that could lead directly to the criminal organization. Meanwhile, Alain discovers that Mikhail was connected to a powerful criminal network with international connections. The organization is involved in illegal business and has enough influence to protect its members. Alain understands that taking them down will not be simple because ordinary criminals are only the outer layer of the operation. Behind them are people with money, connections, and armed men willing to eliminate anyone who becomes a threat. Alain begins following the trail left by Mikhail before his death. Every location and every name reveals another piece of the puzzle. He realizes that Mikhail may have discovered information that made him dangerous to the organization. This gives Alain a possible explanation for the murder, but he still needs solid evidence. Without evidence, he cannot expose the criminals and prove exactly what happened. As Alain moves closer to the organization, his undercover identity becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Several criminals begin noticing that Mikhail seems different from the man they knew. Alain has different reactions, different habits, and does not remember important details from Mikhail's past. He has to improvise whenever someone questions him. His police training helps him remain calm and read the people around him. When one situation becomes violent, Alain uses his fighting ability to protect himself and escape. His actions convince some criminals that Mikhail has simply become more aggressive, but others remain suspicious. Alain realizes that he cannot keep pretending forever. He must discover the truth before his enemies discover his real identity. Every fight and every conversation brings him closer to exposure. Still, Alain refuses to stop because he believes his brother deserves justice. The investigation also reveals that Mikhail's enemies are connected to people who have been watching his movements for a long time. Alain understands that the criminals are not simply reacting to his investigation, they are actively searching for anyone who might know too much. This makes Alex vulnerable as well. Alain becomes determined to keep her safe while continuing his investigation. He knows that protecting her could make him an even bigger target, but he refuses to abandon her. Their relationship gradually becomes stronger as Alex begins trusting Alain and understanding his motives. For Alain, this is no longer only about discovering his brother's killer. He is also trying to protect the people Mikhail left behind. The emotional connection makes the investigation more personal. Alain starts wondering what his relationship with Mikhail might have been if they had grown up together. The tragedy of their separation makes Mikhail's death even harder for him to accept. Alain eventually gets closer to the people controlling the criminal operation and realizes that the danger is much greater than he originally imagined. He cannot simply walk into their world and arrest everyone because he still needs to understand how the organization works. Instead, he continues gathering information while pretending to be Mikhail. His face gives him access, but his lack of memories remains his biggest weakness. Alain carefully watches conversations and remembers every name and detail that could help him later. Meanwhile, the criminals become more suspicious because Mikhail is behaving differently. Alain knows that one major mistake could expose everything. If they discover that Mikhail is dead, they will immediately understand that someone has been impersonating him. That person would become their next target. Alain therefore decides that he must move faster and take greater risks. The investigation is approaching a point where hiding may no longer be enough. Alex becomes an important part of Alain's investigation because she knows details about Mikhail that no police file could ever reveal. She explains how Mikhail behaved, where he went, and which people he trusted. Alain listens carefully because even small details could help him identify the criminals. At the same time, Alex struggles emotionally with the situation because the man in front of her looks exactly like her husband but is actually his twin brother. Alain also feels the strange weight of their connection because he is slowly discovering a family member he never had the chance to know. Their partnership becomes stronger as they realize that they are both trapped in the same dangerous situation. Alain promises to uncover the truth behind Mikhail's death, while Alex helps him understand the hidden parts of Mikhail's life. However, they both know that the criminals could be watching them. They have to be careful about where they go and whom they trust. Every piece of information they uncover brings them closer to the people who want them silenced. Alain eventually comes face to face with some of the men who worked with Mikhail, and he has to convince them that nothing has changed. The criminals speak to him as if he is Mikhail and expect him to understand their business. Alain carefully chooses his words and avoids giving away his lack of knowledge. His confidence helps him survive these encounters, but some men remain suspicious. They remember Mikhail's personality and recognize that something is different. Alain understands that he cannot rely on his appearance forever. His enemies may eventually realize that the man standing before them is not the real Mikhail. When one encounter turns violent, Alain's police training and martial arts skills allow him to fight his way through several attackers. His ability to handle himself surprises the criminals, but it also creates more questions. Alain has no choice but to keep moving because staying in one place would make him an easy target. He begins realizing that the only way to survive is to uncover the organization's leadership before they discover his secret. The investigation takes Alain deeper into the criminal world, where he learns that Mikhail had been involved in dangerous deals with people who had enormous influence. These criminals are not afraid of police officers because they have protection and connections that make them difficult to reach. Alain realizes that simply exposing one low-level criminal will not solve the problem. He needs to find the people who are actually controlling the operation. His investigation leads him through a series of dangerous meetings and confrontations. Every location reminds him that he is walking through the life his brother left behind. At times, Alain wonders whether Mikhail had tried to escape this world before his death. If that was true, then Mikhail may have been killed because he wanted to leave. Alain becomes determined to find evidence that can prove what happened. Meanwhile, the criminals continue their own search, trying to understand why Mikhail has suddenly changed. Alain knows that the longer he stays inside their world, the greater the chance that someone will discover his secret. The danger becomes even more serious when Alain realizes that Alex could become a target. The criminals know that she was close to Mikhail, and they may believe she has information about his activities. Alain refuses to let them use her against him. He starts protecting her while continuing his investigation, even though doing so makes his position more difficult. Alex begins seeing the difference between Alain and Mikhail more clearly. Alain is motivated by justice, while Mikhail's life had been surrounded by secrets and criminal relationships. This difference helps Alex understand that Alain is genuinely trying to uncover the truth rather than take his brother's place permanently. Their trust grows, but the situation around them becomes more dangerous. Alain knows that he cannot protect Alex forever unless he destroys the organization threatening them. His investigation therefore becomes a race against time. The criminals are getting closer, and every new clue brings Alain closer to a direct confrontation. Alain finally begins to understand the larger plan behind Mikhail's death. His brother was connected to people who were involved in a major criminal operation, and someone within that world had a strong reason to remove him. Alain realizes that Mikhail may have known something that could expose powerful people. This explains why the criminals are so desperate to control information. Alain begins collecting evidence that could connect the murder to the organization, but he also realizes that evidence alone will not save him if his identity is exposed. He must carefully choose the moment to strike. Until then, he continues pretending to be Mikhail and uses every opportunity to learn more. His police instincts help him recognize lies and hidden motives. He watches the criminals closely and begins identifying the people who appear to have the most power. Every observation helps him narrow the list of suspects. At the same time, Alain becomes more confident that he can eventually bring the truth into the open. Alex remains beside Alain and helps him understand the man Mikhail really was. She explains details about their life together and reveals information about Mikhail's contacts that Alain could never have discovered alone. For Alex, the situation is emotionally difficult because Alain looks exactly like her husband, yet everything about his personality feels different. Alain is more direct, more protective, and more focused on justice. Alex slowly understands that these differences prove Alain is genuinely trying to discover the truth rather than simply taking Mikhail's place. Their relationship becomes stronger as they face the danger together. Alain also begins to care about Alex's safety, knowing that the criminals could use her to get information from him. He tells her that they must be extremely careful because the organization may be watching them. Meanwhile, Alain continues searching for evidence about Mikhail's activities. He discovers that his brother had contact with people involved in a major criminal operation, and that certain information surrounding those activities could have been the reason for his murder. Alex's memories become important clues, helping Alain understand where Mikhail had been and who he had trusted before his death. As Alain moves deeper into the organization, he encounters criminals who knew Mikhail personally. These men immediately recognize his face and treat him as if he is Mikhail. Alain has to maintain the deception while secretly studying their reactions. He notices that some of them seem nervous whenever Mikhail's name is mentioned, while others are clearly afraid of certain people higher in the organization. Alain begins using these reactions to identify the real power structure. His police instincts allow him to recognize that the lowest level criminals are only following orders. The real people responsible are hidden behind layers of protection. Alain knows that reaching them will require patience, but his situation is becoming more dangerous every day. When one group of criminals becomes suspicious, Alain is forced into a violent confrontation. He uses his combat skills to overpower his attackers and escape before they can identify him. The fight makes it clear that Alain is not an easy target. However, it also confirms that the criminals are becoming more alert. Alain realizes that his enemies will soon start investigating why Mikhail has suddenly become so dangerous and unpredictable. The pressure increases when Alain discovers that the criminal organization is connected to a much larger operation involving money, illegal deals, and powerful people. Mikhail was not simply working for criminals, he had become part of a system where many people depended on secrecy. Alain understands that someone who threatens that secrecy can become a target immediately. This gives him a stronger reason to believe that Mikhail was murdered because he knew too much. Alain begins tracing the movements of the people closest to his brother and looking for evidence that connects them to the murder. Every clue leads him toward another dangerous location. He realizes that the criminals are protecting something extremely valuable, and Mikhail may have been caught between people fighting for control of it. Alain decides that he needs to find the person at the center of the operation. If he can identify that person, he may finally understand why his brother was killed. But getting close to the leader means entering the most dangerous part of the criminal world. Alain's relationship with Alex also becomes more important as the investigation continues. Alex understands that Alain is risking his life to find justice for a brother he never knew. She begins helping him whenever possible, even though she knows that staying close to Alain could put her in danger. Their growing trust gives Alain emotional strength, but it also creates another responsibility. He does not want Alex to become another victim of the criminal organization. When he discovers that certain criminals are interested in her, he becomes even more determined to end the investigation quickly. Alain realizes that he cannot simply keep hiding behind Mikhail's identity. Eventually, he will have to confront the people who ordered the murder. Until then, he uses every opportunity to gather information and understand their plans. Alex helps him recognize details about Mikhail's past that reveal how complicated his life had become. Alain starts seeing his brother as more than a mysterious stranger. He begins to understand that Mikhail was a man trapped in circumstances that eventually led him to his death. The criminals also begin noticing that Mikhail is behaving differently. Alain's refusal to follow old patterns creates suspicion, especially among people who knew Mikhail closely. Some believe that Mikhail has changed because of the pressure surrounding him, while others begin questioning whether he is actually the same man. Alain understands that his time is running out. He needs to make his move before the criminals discover that Mikhail is dead. If his identity is exposed, he will lose his advantage and become a direct target. Alain therefore begins taking bigger risks. He follows suspects, enters dangerous places, and confronts people who might know the truth. His police training helps him remain focused even when the situation becomes violent. Every confrontation brings him closer to the organization's inner circle. He knows that the final answers are somewhere ahead, but reaching them will require him to survive increasingly dangerous enemies. Alain refuses to back down because the memory of his brother continues pushing him forward. Eventually, Alain realizes that the entire situation is approaching a major confrontation. He has discovered enough information to understand that Mikhail's death was connected to powerful criminals who wanted to protect their operation. Now he must identify exactly who ordered the killing and why. The criminals are becoming suspicious. Alex is in danger and Alain's disguise could collapse at any moment. Yet instead of escaping, Alain prepares to take the fight directly to the people responsible. His mission has changed from simply solving a murder into destroying the criminal network that caused it. He knows that the people at the top will not surrender easily, and they have enough resources to hunt him down. Alain's only chance is to use the identity they believe belongs to Mikhail against them. The closer he gets to the truth, the more dangerous his position becomes. But Alain is no longer afraid of what he might discover. He is ready to uncover the full story of his twin brother and make sure that the people responsible for his death finally face the consequences. Alain Moreau is now deep inside the dangerous criminal world that once controlled his twin brother Mikhail's life. His disguise is still working, but the pressure around him is becoming stronger every day. Alain has learned that Mikhail was connected to Russian criminals and powerful people involved in illegal operations. He also understands that someone deliberately wanted Mikhail dead because his brother knew too much. Instead of walking away, Alain decides to continue the investigation until he discovers the person behind the murder. He uses Mikhail's identity to approach dangerous people and gather information without immediately revealing that he is actually a police officer. Every meeting is risky because the criminals expect him to remember details from Mikhail's past. Alain has to remain confident while secretly studying their behavior and searching for clues. His police experience helps him recognize when someone is lying or hiding information. However, the deeper he goes, the more he realizes that the organization is much larger than he originally imagined. Mikhail's death is only one part of a much bigger criminal operation. Alex becomes Alain's strongest connection to Mikhail's personal life. She knows things about her husband that cannot be found in police records, and her memories help Alain understand his brother's movements. Alex also begins realizing how much danger surrounds them. The criminals are powerful, and they have people watching those connected to Mikhail. Alain wants to protect Alex because he knows that she could become a target if the organization discovers what she knows. Their trust grows as they work together to understand Mikhail's final days. Alex explains that Mikhail had become increasingly secretive before his death. He had started behaving differently and seemed worried about certain people around him. These details strengthen Alain's belief that Mikhail had discovered something dangerous. Alain begins connecting those changes with the criminal organization he is investigating. he realizes that his brother may have been trying to protect himself or find a way out. Unfortunately, he never got the chance. Now Alain is determined to finish what Mikhail could not. Alain's investigation takes him closer to the criminals responsible for controlling the operation. He begins identifying the people who have influence over the organization and notices that everyone seems afraid of someone above them. This tells Alain that there is a hidden leadership structure. The men he encounters are only carrying out orders, while the real decision-makers remain protected. Alain understands that finding the leader is the key to solving the entire mystery. But getting close to that person requires him to continue pretending to be Mikhail. His face gives him access, but his lack of knowledge makes every encounter dangerous. When criminals ask about past deals, Alain has to create believable answers without exposing himself. Sometimes he uses confidence and intimidation to avoid difficult questions. Other times he relies on his fighting ability when conversations turn violent. His enemies begin noticing that Mikhail has become much more aggressive and unpredictable. Alain realizes that this change could eventually expose him, but he has no choice. The truth is becoming more important than maintaining the disguise. The criminal organization becomes increasingly concerned about Mikhail's actions. Alain's behavior is creating problems for people who expected Mikhail to follow their instructions. He begins refusing to accept certain situations and starts asking questions that Mikhail might never have asked. This makes some criminals suspicious, especially those who knew his brother well. Alain understands that they are watching him carefully. He therefore starts moving faster and taking greater risks. He searches for information that can connect Mikhail's death to the organization and tries to discover what his brother knew before he was killed. Every piece of evidence brings him closer to the truth, but also makes the criminals more determined to stop him. Alain realizes that once they discover his real identity, they will not give him a second chance. His only advantage is that they still believe he is Mikhail. He must use that advantage before it disappears. Meanwhile, Alain's connection with Alex becomes deeper. She knows that he is risking everything to find justice for Mikhail, even though they never had the opportunity to know each other as brothers. Alex begins helping Alain more actively and gives him information about Mikhail's contacts. Together, they discover that certain people had reasons to fear Mikhail. Alain begins to understand that his brother may have been caught in a conflict between criminals who were fighting for control. Mikhail could have become dangerous simply because he knew information that powerful people wanted to keep secret. This possibility makes Alain even more determined. He wants to uncover the truth, but he also wants to prevent the same criminals from hurting Alex. He knows that protecting her could expose his feelings and make him vulnerable, but he refuses to abandon her. Their cooperation gives Alain a better chance of understanding Mikhail's past. Every new detail helps him reconstruct the final days of his brother's life. As Alain gets closer to the center of the organization, the danger becomes unavoidable. He encounters armed criminals who are prepared to kill anyone who threatens their business. Alain uses his combat skills to survive several violent encounters, proving that he is capable of handling himself even when surrounded. But physical strength alone will not solve the mystery. Alain needs evidence and a clear understanding of the organization's structure. He begins identifying the people who communicate with the leadership and follows the trail toward the highest-ranking criminals. At the same time, he realizes that someone may already be investigating him. The criminals are beginning to question why Mikhail has suddenly become so determined to uncover information. Alain knows that if they start checking his identity, the truth will be discovered. He therefore has to stay ahead of them while protecting Alex. The situation becomes a dangerous. Alex continues helping Alain understand Mikhail's hidden life. She reveals more information about the people Mikhail trusted and the places he visited before his death. Alain realizes that Mikhail had been living under enormous pressure and may have been trying to protect himself from the same criminals Alain is now investigating. Alex also explains how Mikhail's behavior had changed shortly before he died. These changes convince Alain that his brother was aware of a serious threat. He may have been preparing to leave the criminal world, but someone decided that he could not be allowed to escape. Alain becomes more protective of Alex because he knows she could be targeted simply because she was close to Mikhail. Their partnership becomes stronger, and Alex begins trusting Alain completely. She knows that he is not trying to become Mikhail. He is trying to discover the truth about the brother he never had the chance to know. This emotional connection gives Alain another reason to survive. He wants justice for Mikhail, but he also wants to make sure Alex can escape the dangerous world surrounding her husband. Alain eventually finds himself facing criminals who are becoming more aggressive. They have noticed that Mikhail is behaving differently and are beginning to question his motives. Alain has to stay calm and act as though everything is normal. He uses confidence to hide his lack of knowledge and avoids conversations that could reveal the truth. But the criminals are experienced and do not easily trust anyone. Alain realizes that his disguise is becoming less effective with every passing day. When one group tries to force information from him, the situation turns violent. Alain uses his fighting skills to defend himself and escape. The confrontation proves that he is not helpless, but it also confirms that the criminals are now actively watching him. Alain knows that another mistake could expose his identity. Instead of retreating, he decides to use their suspicion against them. He wants the criminals to believe that Mikhail has become unpredictable because of his own reasons, while secretly using their reactions to discover who is most afraid of him. The investigation then leads Alain toward the people who control the organization's most important activities. He discovers that Mikhail was connected to a powerful criminal operation involving money, illegal deals, and dangerous alliances. The men carrying out the orders are only small pieces of a much larger system. Alain understands that his brother may have discovered information that threatened the entire organization. That could explain why Mikhail became a target. Alain begins looking for the final connection between Mikhail and the people who ordered his murder. He follows clues from one criminal to another and slowly narrows the list of possible suspects. At the same time, he has to avoid being trapped by the organization. The criminals are becoming more organized in their search for Mikhail, and Alain realizes that they may soon discover that he is not the same man. His only chance is to move before they are ready. He knows that the final answers are close, but reaching them could require him to enter the most dangerous part of the criminal network. Alex's safety becomes even more important when Alain discovers that the criminals are interested in her. He understands that they could use her as leverage if they realize how much she knows. Alain decides to keep her away from the most dangerous situations, but Alex refuses to simply wait while he risks his life alone. She wants to help him finish the investigation. Together, they begin preparing for the confrontation that seems unavoidable. Alain tells Alex that the criminals will not stop until they recover whatever information Mikhail knew. Alex realizes that the only way to become safe is to expose the people responsible. Their partnership becomes more than an investigation because they are now fighting for survival. Alain also begins to understand that his brother's death has changed him. Before discovering Mikhail, Alain was simply a police officer solving other people's crimes. Now he is emotionally involved in the case. He wants to know who his brother really was and why their lives were separated for so long. The criminals eventually make a serious move against Alain. They believe Mikhail is becoming a threat and decide that he must be controlled before he causes more problems. Alain recognizes that this is exactly what he has been waiting for. Their actions reveal which people are most afraid of Mikhail and who has the authority to give orders. Alain uses the situation to gather more evidence while protecting himself from attack. His police training becomes essential because he understands how criminals think and how they try to eliminate witnesses. He also knows that fighting everyone directly would be a mistake. Instead, he chooses his moments carefully and continues working toward the people at the top. Every step brings him closer to exposing the organization. However, the danger is now extreme. Alain can no longer pretend that everything will return to normal. The criminals have become aware that Mikhail is acting differently and their patience is running out. Alain knows that the final confrontation cannot be avoided. He was connected to people who had powerful reasons to keep their activities hidden. Alain realizes that Mikhail may have been trying to protect himself or escape from the organization. Unfortunately, he was killed before he could do it. Now Alain has taken his place, and the criminals are unknowingly giving him access to their secrets. Alex understands how dangerous this plan is, but she also knows that stopping now would leave Mikhail's murder unanswered. Alain begins following the organization's movements more aggressively. He discovers that the criminals are preparing important operations and that several influential people are involved. His police instincts tell him that the organization has been protected for a long time because the people at the top have powerful connections. Alain cannot simply arrest everyone he encounters because he needs enough information to identify the real leaders. He therefore continues gathering evidence while pretending to be Mikhail. This becomes increasingly difficult because the criminals expect him to understand their business. Alain has to rely on quick thinking whenever someone asks him about a past meeting or deal. Sometimes he manages to redirect the conversation, while at other times his physical skills save him from dangerous situations. His opponents begin realizing that Mikhail is no longer behaving like the man they knew. Alain uses this confusion to his advantage, making them believe that Mikhail has become unpredictable, but he knows that this strategy has limits. If even one person discovers the truth, the entire organization will turn against him. The pressure increases when Alain finds himself surrounded by people who have their own reasons for protecting the criminal operation. Some are motivated by money, others by fear, and some by loyalty to the men controlling everything. Alain studies these relationships carefully because he knows that someone will eventually make a mistake. His investigation reveals that Mikhail had been involved in activities that could expose powerful criminals. This information explains why certain people wanted him removed. Alain begins connecting the final pieces and realizes that the murder was not an isolated act. His brother's death was part of an effort to protect the organization and prevent sensitive information from becoming public. Alain becomes determined to expose the people responsible, but the criminals are also moving against him. They begin tracking his movements and questioning his sudden interest in certain people. Alain realizes that the net is closing. He must act before they discover that Mikhail is already dead. The longer he waits, the more difficult it becomes to maintain the illusion. Meanwhile, Alain and Alex become increasingly close as they face the danger together. Alex knows that Alain is risking his life for a brother he never had the chance to know, and she understands how much the investigation has affected him. Alain begins thinking about Mikhail not simply as a stranger with the same face, but as a missing part of his own family. He wonders what their lives might have been like if they had grown up together. That thought makes Mikhail's death even more painful. Alain refuses to let the criminals erase his brother's existence. He also refuses to allow Alex to become another victim. When he learns that the organization could be watching her, he takes steps to protect her. Alex, however, understands that hiding will not solve the problem. They need to expose the people behind the operation. Their combined knowledge gives Alain a clearer picture of what he must do. He has to get close enough to the organization's leadership to uncover the truth, then find a way to survive the inevitable confrontation. Alain's investigation eventually brings him face to face with more dangerous members of the criminal network. They expect Mikhail to cooperate, but Alain begins challenging their demands and asking questions that make them uncomfortable. His behavior causes tension, and the criminals start becoming more aggressive. When the situation turns violent, Alain demonstrates just how capable he is. His police training and physical strength allow him to survive attacks that would overwhelm an ordinary person. However, every fight also creates more suspicion. Alain realizes that his enemies are beginning to understand that something is wrong with Mikhail. He therefore decides that he cannot remain undercover indefinitely. His goal is now to identify the most important people involved and gather enough information to destroy their operation. He uses his identity as Mikhail to gain access, but he prepares for the moment when the disguise will finally collapse. Alain knows that when that happens, there will be no opportunity to escape peacefully. The criminals will come after him with everything they have. The organization finally begins making moves that force Alain into direct action. He realizes that the people at the top are becoming aware of the threat created by Mikhail's unexpected behavior. They want answers and they want control. Alain understands that the moment he has feared is approaching. Instead of retreating, he decides to use their fear against them. He allows them to believe that Mikhail is still operating independently while secretly preparing to expose their activities. His plan is dangerous because it depends on timing and deception. If he moves too early, he will lose the evidence he needs. If he waits too long, the criminals may discover his real identity and kill him. Alex supports him, but both know that the next confrontation could change everything. Alain is no longer simply investigating his brother's death. He is now challenging an entire criminal organization that has survived by eliminating anyone who threatens it. His determination becomes stronger because he knows that Mikhail never received the chance to fight back. Alain's investigation leads him toward the most powerful figures connected to Mikhail's criminal life. He begins to understand that Mikhail was involved with people whose operations extended far beyond simple street crime. Money, illegal deals, weapons, and criminal connections all form part of the dangerous network. Alain realizes that Mikhail may have been caught in a conflict involving people who were willing to kill to protect their interests. The clues suggest that his brother knew information that could become extremely dangerous if it reached the wrong people. This explains why Mikhail had enemies and why his death was carried out so quickly. Alain now knows that finding the person responsible is only half the battle. He must also survive long enough to expose the entire operation. His appearance continues confusing the criminals because they still believe Mikhail is alive. Alain uses this mistake to move closer to them while secretly preparing for the moment when everything will be revealed. Alex becomes even more determined to help Alain after realizing how close they are to the truth. She understands that the criminals may try to use her against him, but she refuses to abandon the investigation. Alain tells her that the situation is becoming too dangerous, yet Alex knows that hiding will not protect them forever. Together they examine the information connected to Mikhail's final days. Alex remembers important details about people who had been around her husband and begins recognizing connections that Alain could not see. These details help Alain understand the chain of events that led to the murder. He also starts seeing Mikhail differently. Instead of thinking of him only as a mysterious twin, Alain begins imagining the life they could have shared if they had grown up together. That emotional connection makes his mission more personal. Alain is no longer trying to solve an ordinary case. He is trying to give his brother a voice after his death and protect the people Mikhail cared about. The criminals eventually make their move, forcing Alain into a series of dangerous confrontations. They believe Mikhail has become a serious problem and want to find out what he knows. Alain has to fight his way through their attempts to control him while continuing to hide his true identity. His combat skills become essential as the situation turns violent. He uses speed, strength, and experience to survive attacks from heavily armed men. But Alain understands that defeating individual criminals will not end the danger. The real threat is the organization behind them. He therefore keeps looking for the people giving the orders. Every confrontation gives him another opportunity to learn who is involved. At the same time, the criminals become more convinced that something is wrong with Mikhail. Alain realizes that the moment of discovery is getting closer. If they learn that Mikhail is dead and Alain has been using his identity, they will understand that they have been deceived from the beginning. Alain's determination becomes stronger when he realizes that the criminals are also putting Alex in danger. He knows that they could target her to obtain information or force him to surrender. Alain refuses to let that happen. He takes greater risks to keep her safe while continuing the investigation. Alex also understands that Alain cannot solve everything alone. She helps him follow the remaining clues and identify the people connected to Mikhail's final activities. Their trust has become essential to Alain's survival. At the same time, Alain begins preparing for the possibility that his identity will soon be exposed. He knows that once the criminals realize he is not Mikhail, there will be no reason for them to keep him alive. His only chance is to strike first and use everything he has learned against them. The investigation has now become a race against time, with Alain trying to uncover the final truth before his enemies discover his secret. Eventually, Alain comes close enough to the heart of the criminal operation to understand how dangerous the final confrontation will be. The people at the top have protected themselves by surrounding their operation with loyal criminals and powerful connections. Alain cannot simply walk into the world and expect to survive. He needs to use surprise, intelligence, and his physical abilities together. His greatest advantage remains his face, because the criminals still associate him with Mikhail. Alain uses that confusion to get closer to the people who know what happened, but he also understands that the deception cannot continue much longer. His enemies are becoming increasingly aggressive, and their suspicion is reaching its highest point. Alain prepares himself for the moment when they finally realize the truth. He knows that when that happens, he will have to fight for his life and protect Alex at the same time. Despite the danger, Alain refuses to retreat because he has already come too far. Now the final confrontation is beginning to take shape. Alain has discovered enough about Mikhail's secret life to understand why his brother became a target, and he knows that powerful criminals are responsible for the events surrounding his death. The identity that once confused him has now become his greatest weapon. He is no longer simply pretending to be Mikhail. He is using the criminals' belief against them. Alain prepares to expose the people who thought they could kill Mikhail and erase the evidence. Alex remains close, knowing that the coming battle could decide both of their futures. Alain thinks about the brother he never had the opportunity to meet properly, and realizes that this entire journey has given him a strange connection to Mikhail. He cannot change the past or bring his brother back, but he can make sure his death was not meaningless. With the criminals closing in and the truth finally within reach, Alain prepares to make his final move. The man who entered this dangerous world looking for answers is now ready to bring the entire operation crashing down. Alain Moreau finally reaches the moment he has been working toward since discovering that Mikhail was his identical twin brother. The criminals are closing in, and Alain knows that his disguise cannot protect him forever. He has uncovered enough information to understand that Mikhail was killed because he became connected to dangerous people and knew things that could threaten their criminal operation. Alain now decides that the only way to finish the investigation is to confront the people responsible directly. He has spent much of the story pretending to be Mikhail, but now he uses that identity as a weapon against the criminals. They still believe they are dealing with Mikhail, giving Alain the opportunity to move through their world and reach the people at the top. His police training, intelligence, and fighting ability allow him to survive the dangerous situations surrounding him. However, Alain knows that this final stage will be different because his enemies are prepared to eliminate anyone who stands in their way. He is determined to finish the mission even if it means putting his own life at risk. The final confrontation brings Alain face to face with the criminals who have been controlling the dangerous operation. The people around them are heavily armed, and Alain realizes that there will be no peaceful solution. He has spent enough time studying their behavior to understand how they operate. They use fear and violence to protect themselves, believing that anyone who challenges them can simply be removed. Alain refuses to be intimidated. He fights his way through the men standing between him and the truth, using his physical strength and combat experience to survive. The action becomes increasingly intense as Alain moves deeper into the criminal operation. Every fight represents another step toward the people responsible for his brother's death. At the same time, Alain remains focused on protecting Alex. He knows that she could become a target if the criminals realize how important she is to him. The danger is now everywhere, but Alain continues moving forward because he understands that retreating would only allow Mikhail's killers to escape. As the confrontation continues, Alain's true identity eventually becomes impossible to hide. The criminals realize that the man they believed was Mikhail is actually his identical twin brother. This discovery shocks them because they believed Mikhail was already dead and could not have returned. Alain finally reveals the truth, making it clear that he entered their world to discover who killed his brother. The criminals realize that their mistake allowed Alain to learn important information about their operation. Instead of being frightened by the revelation, Alain becomes more determined. He has survived their attempts to stop him, protected Alex, and uncovered the secrets surrounding Mikhail's death. Now he wants justice. The criminals try to eliminate him, but Alain refuses to surrender. His skills as a police officer give him an advantage because he understands how criminals think and how they react under pressure. The confrontation becomes a battle between Alain's determination and the organization's desire to protect itself. Alex also becomes an important part of the final struggle. She has spent the entire story trying to understand what happened to her husband, and now she finally sees the truth about the criminal world surrounding him. Alain wants her to survive and escape the violence, but the situation makes that extremely difficult. The criminals know that Alex is connected to Mikhail and Alain, so she becomes vulnerable. Alain does everything possible to keep her safe while continuing the fight. Their relationship has developed through danger and trust, and Alex now understands that Alain is not trying to replace Mikhail. He is trying to honor the brother he never had the opportunity to know. This realization gives emotional meaning to the final confrontation. Alain is fighting not only for his own survival, but also for Mikhail's memory. He wants to prove that the criminals cannot simply murder someone and erase the consequences. Every step he takes brings him closer to ending the organization's control. The action reaches its most dangerous point as Alain faces the strongest opposition the criminals can send against him. He has to use everything he has learned throughout the investigation. His physical abilities allow him to survive close-range fights, while his police instincts help him anticipate attacks. The criminals have the advantage of numbers and weapons, but Alain has determination and the element of surprise. He refuses to stop even when the odds seem impossible. The fight becomes a final test of everything he has experienced since discovering Mikhail. The innocent police officer who began the story simply searching for answers has now become a determined fighter willing to risk everything for justice. Alain manages to push through the final resistance and bring the criminal operation closer to collapse. The people who once believed they controlled everything are suddenly facing someone they never expected. Mikhail's identical twin has become their greatest threat, and they are forced to deal with the consequences of the murder they thought they had successfully hidden. After the main confrontation, Alain finally begins to understand the full emotional impact of what has happened. His investigation has revealed the truth about Mikhail, but it has also forced him to confront the fact that his brother is gone. Alain never had the chance to grow up with Mikhail, share memories with him, or build a normal brotherly relationship. Instead, he discovered him only after his death. Yet, by entering Mikhail's life, Alain learned enough to understand that they were connected by more than their identical appearance. Mikhail became part of Alain's life through tragedy, and Alain refuses to forget him. Alex also begins moving forward, carrying the memories of the man she loved while understanding the sacrifices Alain made. The danger surrounding them is finally beginning to disappear, allowing them to think about life beyond the criminal world. Alain can finally stop pretending to be someone else. He can return to being himself, but the experience has changed him permanently. He now carries the memory of a brother he never truly had the chance to know. In the end, Alain's journey becomes a story about identity, family, justice, and revenge. He began as a police officer who accidentally discovered that another man looked exactly like him. That shocking discovery opened the door to a hidden family secret and a dangerous criminal conspiracy. By taking Mikhail's identity, Alain entered a world that could have destroyed him, but he used his courage and skills to uncover the truth. He faced criminals, survived violent confrontations, protected Alex, and eventually confronted the people responsible for Mikhail's death. Alain could never bring his brother back, but he succeeded in making sure that Mikhail's death was not forgotten. The experience also gave Alain a connection to the brother he never knew existed. As the story comes to an end, Alain can finally leave the dangerous world behind and begin returning to his own life. But he will always remember the extraordinary discovery that changed everything. Somewhere in the world there had been another man with his face, his blood, and his family connection. Mikhail may be gone, but through Alain's actions, his story finally receives the justice it deserved.